All right, thanks very much for joining. So this session, we're talking about ESG considerations for compliance teams. So we do want to focus on some of the topics around what's coming up with ESG, some of the disclosure frameworks, and what's coming up next for in terms of compliance and how do we actually manage, and some of the things that we should start thinking about from a compliance perspective for in the financial industry. My name is Sean Wong. I'm the head of ESG software product at MetricStream. So we provide both ESG and GRC enterprise software solutions for financial industries and other sectors. Today, I'm joined by a very experienced set of panelists, all coming in from the compliance world. I'm joined by Sabina Haig, Letter DeLittle, and Juliana Ruiz, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I'm Sabina Haig. I'm CCO at Sears Capital Group. I've been with the firm for 4 years, and I've been in the compliance space for about 17 years now. And ESG, as you know, has become a pretty important topic. And so we're here today to kind of discuss, all the facets of what we've been doing in our program. And we love to hear from everybody else on this panel and what they've been doing.
Sure. I'm Letty DeLittle. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer at Grain Management. I've been with Grain for just about 3 years now, and working in compliance and financial services compliance for about 15. Grain Management is a telecommunications focused private equity investor, and so yeah, we've driven into ESG recently, and mirror what Sabina said, excited to hear more about what everyone else is doing in this space.
Hi, I'm Juliana Ruiz. I'm a partner and general counsel, as well as head of our ESG committee at Trilantic Capital Management. We're a growth-focused middle market private equity firm focused on business services, consumer, and energy sectors. I've been with Trilantic for about 8 years, and in this sector and industry for about 16. As head of the ESG committee, we've been kind of looking into ESG issues and areas for opportunities for about 6 years or so now. So I'm excited to join this panel and hear about what everybody else is doing as well.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. So Kelly, what I want to do now is let's cue the first polling questions. So we're going to pop that up on the screen in just a moment. But basically, the question is, where are you currently in your ESG program? So if you can see the polling questions, I'm going to read them out loud. So the first option is, our ESG program is fully in place, and we're regularly publishing ESG metrics. The second, we are currently in the process of implementing an ESG program. And the last is, we have not yet started an ESG program. So I just want to get a quick poll from the audience and get some quick statistics and get some responses from the group. Yes, we'll give that a few minutes. So while we're thinking about that, and while we start collecting some of the polling questions, I think the first questions I really want to go through with our panelists today is, what are we doing today, and what are some of the key drivers? So of course, from a compliance perspective, we're seeing lots of activities in Europe. So we've seen frameworks such as SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure regulations, and also TCFD being selected for the UK companies. In the US, we're seeing some activities with the SEC, but not yet finalized. So what are some of the key drivers right now in terms of what to disclose, how to disclose it, and the key objectives that you're for your organizations? And Sabina, why don't we start with you?
All right. Yeah. So we're kind of one of the managers that is in the process of implementing our ESG program. So we are evaluating exactly what disclosures to put in, whether that is disclosures in our PPNs, our LPAs. If we're going to go that far, probably stick with PPNs on our Form ADV, and then what disclosures we need to put on our website. We are not an impact manager, so we're just a PE middle market fund who takes in ESG considerations into our program. But we do consider ESG important, and we do consider that an important consideration when we're looking at our platform deals. And so we've taken the journey with ACA to kind of reach out to our portfolio companies and implement an ESG program. We are also registered in a few jurisdictions in Europe. And so Europe implemented a rule in March of this year, 2021, the SFDR, which originally was thought to just affect non-EU managers, but not non-EU managers. The EU recently put out guidance that implicated that non-EU managers did have some disclosure. So for our PPM and other documents, we are looking to update disclosures as we go through with new products going forward. And then also there will be some sort of website disclosure on ESG specific to the EU, but also we are looking, just because we are in the process of implementing our program, we think it's very important. We are putting a ESG related section on our website to talk about what we're been doing at Ceres and then across the portfolio.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we're in a similar position, but we just implemented a lot of these disclosures. So if you check our website under our ESG, our impact section, at the bottom, you'll see all the relevant disclosure needed to make sure we're not confused as an impact fund, because like Sabina stated for her fund, we take ESG considerations into consideration, but it is not the sole focus of our fund and our investment mandate. And I think for the European side, that distinction is very important, not just to investors, but also it will affect the type of reporting that you have to that you'll have to get involved with. So understanding the difference between what an impact fund is and what an impact fund is for EU purposes versus any kind of colloquial use of impact fund or ESG fund is pretty important, and making sure you have those disclaimers, as sometimes as ugly as those disclaimers can get, just explaining that to your business folks as to this is why we're doing this and this is why it's necessary, and it's more technical rather than any kind of statement that we're not focused on ESG.
And I would, to many extents, mirror what Sabina and Juliana said and say, I think the whole industry is working through what does ESG mean. It is an unclear definition. And similar to them, we are a single sector focused manager. And so investing in the telecommunications sector creates a natural fit for certain ESG initiatives, and I use the word impacts not with a capital I, but just a more casual phrase. We investing in broadband has an impact on the communities we serve, and we've always seen that. It's always been a natural fit for us. So adding in ESG as a more formal process and a data collection process is something that has been very beneficial to us in really assessing how the sustainability and the impact, the ESG factors that are part of our investment analysis are essential to creating value. We're not active in Europe at this point, so we have not delved deeply into any of those regulations, but it's something that we keep an eye on because we will be moving there eventually. So the impact space is so interesting, and but it is very interesting also about how that is not the same as ESG, and it doesn't even seem to be really a sort of slippery slope between ESG and impact. It's a completely different approach.
Yeah. Thank you, Letty. And just to build on your point, Letty, in terms of the evolving space, all the organizations out there is actually trying to learn more and trying to define what ESG means. And some of the things that we've talked about before, there's a really lack of standardization of how companies want to collect data with ESG, what metrics to set, what type of disclosures. I think there's a huge difference between ESG reporting and impact reporting. So what are your thoughts on the just sort of cutting through that chaos in terms of the lack of standardization? Should organization wait for more standardization down the road, or should they start to adopt some of the existing frameworks, for example, SASB, GRI, UNPRI, some of these existing frameworks to get started, to get almost their first cut in terms of an ESG disclosure program?
I think that so our position has been to take a little bit of a wait and see approach. We are not a UNPRI signatory. I know that Juliana and Sabina's firms are. I believe they are. But we chose not to because we felt that with our single sector focus, it just didn't necessarily fit with our business. But I think in 2021, we've seen a few developments that have been leading, hopefully, the world into a more cohesive direction. The ESG data convergence project is something that we signed on to. It's a very clean and understandable approach with 6 ESG factors to report on, that if all LPs and GPs, as the convergence project desires and wishes and is working towards, if everybody agrees to those 6 data points, I think it will be really helpful for GPs and LPs, because we'll all be talking the same language as we report on ESG. I know there's a desire to add more factors beyond the 6, but I do think that's a really great start to get the industry to coalesce around some agreed upon reporting and data collection statistics. I also think that the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance, which I believe is a conglomerate of several of the ESG and sustainable development entities out there, have come together on some metrics, and they've looked at cross industries on a sector by sector basis. I think that's really helpful to us as well. They definitely, they map a lot of the sustainable development goals to some of the SASB data points, which I view as really helpful, and hopefully that is, indicative of more to come as the industry becomes a bit more unified around this topic. Because I think being more unified is only going to help everybody talk about this topic.
Excellent. And just a quick follow-up on that. So I know, Juliana, you come from the general counsel space. What do you see the differences when it comes to organizations that are rolling up their ESG program into compliance or risk versus organizations that are rolling up directly to the GC organizations?
Well, I have the privilege of being both GC and CCO, so it kind of I think I was viewing it, especially at the beginning, as more of a compliance area, especially now with the focus and the SEC focus on it, et cetera. But from the kind of the GC hat role, it's I think it ends up being a little bit more about how you're positioning the firm, what you want the firm's story to be, and kind of more so it's almost like the compliance comes second to, once the firm has decided just how they're going to incorporate ESG, how important it's going to be to them. Is it something that's woven in through all aspects of the firm, or is it really right now just more of a check the box and make sure you're not getting into trouble? So are you going to be proactive? Is it going to be part of the fabric, or are you just kind of holding back and just making sure you're not going to get slapped on the wrist for something or get caught with something? So I think it's a little bit more of a kind of philosophy, so to speak. And for me, since I've been wearing both hats, I saw from the beginning, we probably started up with our program. What year is it today? Like about 6 years ago. And in the beginning, it was really more of a just general antenna from my side of saying, hey, like there's questions being asked by the SEC on these ESG programs. I'm seeing investor diligence requests about our ESG program. Do we have one? What do we do? Like, what is the basic tenets of ESG, and what are we already doing? Because for most firms in our position, I mean, especially on the governance side, people were already doing things. They just weren't putting it under the umbrella of ESG, or maybe not taking like one step extra that would have been needed to call it kind of ESG. So for us in the beginning, it was really just gathering what we currently do, what, if anything, we were willing to do extra, and then making sure that what we were doing came across as a story to all of our constituents. And then once we had that program, the compliance side kicked in and made sure we had appropriate disclosures for things both that we were doing and things that we weren't doing. So I think it became a little bit of a mixed bag. And, one thing I would add too is that as our program has matured, it came from, me knocking on doors and saying, this is something new and, people not quite understanding it, to now folks in the deal teams being a lot more proactive about it, because it's not just investors that are asking for these things, but it's also potential buyers of our companies. So, we have even I'm making the last few pitches from potential portfolio companies. I've seen their management teams just proactively bring up kind of ESG considerations. And then I've gotten a few incoming calls from our deal teams about the fact that their management team is getting ready for any kind of sale or next step, saying, hey, we actually need to accelerate our annual monitor and bring down ESG report because we want this to be ready, and people being a lot more involved and just understanding that it's part of their story, as opposed to just something in the back end that compliance is just checking to make sure you're not getting into trouble.
I was just going to second that. It really, Juliana summed that up really well. It's really about what's important to your firm and the fabric, and not necessarily being an impact manager, as Letty said, but really, is ESG important to your firm? Do you have a social responsibility? Do you have a corporate responsibility? Do you have an environmental responsibility? Whatever that may be. And so for us, it was exactly as Juliana mentioned, that we had a bunch of things in place, but they weren't formalized in a cohesive way. And that's really been our journey. On our ESG committee, we have one of our managing partners on the committee. We have head of IR on the committee. So we have investment folks on the committee. I'm on the committee. We have everybody involved from the beginning of the deal now to through our 100-day plan, right? To look at exactly how ESG considerations are being taken into place. We also have a D&I committee that we work with people across the portfolio company and hold forums to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity topics that come across our portfolio companies. And then we talk about corporate governance. We want to know what our portfolio companies are doing right now. So if they're out in the market just helping with COVID response, or we're at a certain march, we want to know about that, and we want to talk about that because Sarah's, and I'm sure everybody else on this call and everybody listening in does fundamentally care about these issues, whether or not we are measuring if environmental decisions have made a financial impact on our portfolio. We're stepping away from that type of talk track and really just, this is our responsibility. We need to be doing it because it's just good business.
Yeah.
So Sabina, just a question for you. Since your organization manage look at a fairly broad set of sectors, and you also cover portfolio companies in the European space. So how do you sort of normalize the type of metrics that you will monitor and the types of information that you would gather from them? So obviously, if you're dealing with cross-sector portfolio companies, you would measure them on different types of ESG disclosure metrics. So what are some of the things that you're doing in terms of normalizing and actually comparing your companies apples to apples, or it's a completely different approach? You have to kind of look at them individually.
Yeah, so we're in tech and telecom primarily, so I wouldn't say we're in healthcare or energy or anything like that. But each business is different, right? So each business is going to have different ESG concerns. An e-commerce company is not going to have the same concerns as a print and digital company, right? Because printing, you might want to look at the ink and make sure it's environmentally sound, whereas in digital commerce, it's not the same. We are taking through the help of consultants, looking at our carbon footprint, right, across wherever. through our portfolio company at Ceres and kind of mapping that out. So we haven't really laid out metrics in the way that we are, we hope or envision to be over the next year. But we are looking at each portfolio company. We are trying to standardize certain things like carbon footprinting across the portfolio company. But we do have to look at the totality of the circumstances of what we do, and that we are in tech and telecom. And so we aren't in energy or other infrastructure businesses where they're very mature in the environmental stages, right? So an airport is going to be very different than an e-commerce company. And so, and then also where we are in the United States versus where we are in Europe, right? So if we look to a company in Europe, their ESG reporting is phenomenal, right? It's a different level of reporting. So when we go out as a U.S. manager and ask a European portfolio company to fill out our ESG questionnaire while diligence, they're telling us, well, we're just way ahead of the game, and so we're trying to understand what is required in the U.S., but also be sensitive to what's required over the seas and kind of marry those two together. I don't know if anybody else has had similar experiences that I have had on these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're more like you, Letty. We don't buy. Our focus is North American, so we do. I delve into the overseas issues because we have non-U.S. investors and therefore have to be updated that way. But thankfully, have not had too many touches there. We do, obviously, if we're when we have to do updates to the PPM, et cetera, we're very conscious of anything that's required by different jurisdictions. But I think that's basically our where we end up having to go onto the compliance side and figure out, if we are registered for specific funds in those jurisdictions, what requirements specifically to those registrations are required, as opposed to any broader base kind of compliance with just general EU practices, et cetera. So I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and I think we can also add, a nuance here. It's not just the EU that has different reporting and different requirements, right? We recently purchased a company that's in Brazil, and they had actually been previously funded by the IFC, so they actually had a ton of available ESG and sustainability metrics that most of our, mid-cap US companies just hadn't even thought about. I think another point that a lot of you guys, that both of you guys said before, is that when you look at a company, you start asking the questions, they're already doing a lot of these things that we care about from an ESG perspective. They just haven't yet called it ESG. So, there's a lot of stuff out there they're not getting credit for, right? I look at it like, you're doing these things, like, let's get credit for it in every way you can get credit for it. Let's call it ESG if it's ESG, but then let's also call it, whatever it is, whether it's like worker safety, right? That's an ESG issue, but it's also good for the company. You don't want your employees out because they're injured. So I think there's a lot there. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at what your companies are already doing and assess the ESG impact of those things beyond just this is strictly ESG as a bucket that's separate and apart from everything else that goes on at a company. And I think that's particularly true in the social sector, right? Across all of the worker well-being, customer well-being, all of those things are very much ESG, but they're not necessarily viewed as ESG by our companies or by our deal teams as well.
So thanks, Letty. So in the last 5 minutes here, so I think this is a burning question from definitely from our audience here today. What's happening today in the U.S.? Where are we in terms of our compliance landscape? What is the SEC? What are some of the SEC activities? And when will something come out even as a prototype?
Well, I mean, I think from a compliance standpoint, everybody can kind of agree that the new SEC chair is going to is taking a harder line at disclosures, especially if there's any kind of retail investors in any of your funds, et cetera. So I think this is probably a time to really make sure that you have that you're not going ahead and making kind of broad statements that you can't show records of, proof of. If you have that kind of amorphous, like, yes, we know what our portfolio companies kind of do, but haven't written it down in one place, it's worth the time to take stock and just put it down in some kind of desktop policy, desktop guidelines of where things are, what you've been doing, because I think it is kind of a heightened scrutiny time right now. I know that the ILPA Association has come out with a new like form DDQ that has a whole ESG and DEI sections now. So, people are asking more questions. Everybody's trying to figure out what the definitions are. And I think that right now it's still a big question mark. There is no current specific definitions, but that's where the disclosures become even more important, because since there are no specific definitions, you need to make sure that in all your documents, you explain what your definitions are and how you're making calculations. Because that's really all we have until somebody comes out with more of a consensus of what key indicators should be, what the differences are, even in the U.S. for anybody who says that they take into the ESG into considerations. And frankly also, I've been seeing a little bit of a backlash where there are investors or ERISA fiduciaries that are saying, it's great that you care about the environment, et cetera, but we have fiduciary obligations that you can't take that into consideration over our returns. So, or we want to make sure that just because you're putting in place these programs, et cetera, that these are all accretive to your fund strategy and our investment returns. If we wanted to invest in an environmentally friendly fund or an impact fund, we would have done so. So if you did not have that from the get-go and you did not make that explicitly clear, you have to make sure that while you're taking these things into consideration, that it's not becoming kind of a sole focus, or you almost have to prove that it's not detracting from the investment returns and have the documentation for that. So, I think managers right now are kind of walking a fine line of people who are gung-ho, really want to see in advanced programs, and other people saying, wait, we didn't sign up, or we have an allocation specifically for that, and you're not in that bucket. So you just have to be careful about making sure you're walking that line.
Yeah, perfect. And I know we have 1 minute left, and Kelly just queued our last polling question. How would you like to learn more about metrics in ESG? But while we do that, let's have the audience click through that polling question. We do have one question from the audience. What is the role of Section 1502 in Dodd-Frank? So let's see if we can tackle that in the last minute of our session.
I don't.
Yeah, I suspect that we probably don't think about it too much, because I believe that applies to public companies. And since we manage only private companies, I don't know that we've really, I haven't considered that, and also not relevant to my sector, because I believe it involves conflict minerals. So good question. Not sure we're the right panelists for that one.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Yeah, and Sabina, Letty, Juliana, thank you very much again for your time. I know you come from an extremely experienced as a panelist group. Very happy to be joined by your group. I'm coming from the software industry, so I actually learned a lot myself about compliance and also specifically what's happening in the ESG space. So once again, thanks very much, and I hope everybody enjoyed our session.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks.
Thank you.